There are a total of 54 different mushrooms within the entire Plants vs. Zombies franchise, and today I'm going to be giving you a brief overview of every single one of them. And well, we're going to be counting every single plant that's classified as a mushroom, as well. There's certain plants like puffball which don't have the word shroom in the name, but they're still classified as a mushroom. So even if the plant doesn't have the word shroom in the name, we're still going to be looking at it if it's classified as a mushroom. But yeah, starting off with the original Plants vs. Zombies game, we have puff shroom. Now, puff shrooms are pretty weak plants on their own, as well they could only shoot zombies from really short distances and also don't really deal that much damage. But they do end up working together pretty well, as well if you place a lot of puff shrooms down, they could end up doing a pretty good amount of damage in large groups. And well, the main good thing about puff shroom is that he costs 0 stun and he has a pretty fast recharge time. Meaning that you could place down puff shroom a lot and also really quickly, so it ends up making him a pretty good plant, especially when in large groups. So yeah, sometimes puff shroom could actually be a pretty good plant, mattering on the situation. Next we have the sun shroom. Now, when Sunshroom is first planted, he's not really that useful, but over time, he grows larger and ends up producing a lot more sun. So yeah, at the beginning of the level, he won't really be that useful, but if you place tons of them right at the beginning of the level, by about the middle of the level, you'll have some really good sun producers. And well, one pretty good thing about him is that he only costs 25 sun, so by the time that he's fully grown, he'll actually be able to produce a lot more sun. And well, he also has a really fast recharge time, which makes it really useful, as you could place tons of these down really quickly. So yeah, he's overall just a really good alternative to the sunflower, as though sunflower is just pretty expensive, especially for the night when there's not really that much sun. Moving on, we have the fume shroom. Now, fume shroom is actually a really useful plant, especially for the night area, as well he's one of the only plants that could actually shoot screen door zombies, which already makes him a really good plant, as well not that many plants could actually kill screen door zombies. But yeah, one thing that he does suffer from though is that he can only shoot 4 spaces in front of him, as well he can only deal 20 damage to all the zombies within a 4 space area. So if you do want him to actually do any good use, you'll have to place him pretty far up in the lawn to be able to attack zombies pretty quickly. But yeah, he does only cost 75 sun and has a pretty fast recharge time. But yeah, fume shroom is overall really not that bad of a plant, especially because he could kill screen door zombies. Next up we have the hypno shroom. Now, hypno shroom costs 75 sun but has a really slow recharge time. Now, hypno shroom could either be a really good plant or either just a really bad plant, as it sort of just matters of which zombie eats the plant, as if a really powerful zombie eats the plant, like a buckethead zombie, it'll end up being pretty useful, but if a basic zombie eats it, it won't really be that useful. As with the hypno shroom, you're able to just possess a zombie that eats it to attack the other zombies, which is pretty useful, mattering on which zombie eats the hypno shroom. So yeah, you do have to sort of be strategic with the hypno shroom and place it in front of a pretty powerful zombie and make sure that a basic zombie doesn't eat it. But yeah, if you use hypno shroom the right way, he could actually be pretty useful. Next we have the scaredy shroom. Now, scaredy shroom only costs 25 stone and he has a pretty fast recharge time. Now, unlike puff shroom and fume shroom, he actually doesn't have a limited shooting area, as he can shoot across the entire lawn, which does actually make him pretty useful, but one really big downside he has is that any zombie in a 3x3 radius will make him hide, which ends up just making scaredy shroom's potential way lower, as well, but makes it so you have to put scaredy shroom really far back in the lawn, as well if a zombie gets too close to him, he'll just stop attacking. So yeah, that one thing just really lowers how good of a plant he would actually be, as well if he didn't do that, he would actually be a pretty good plant. But yeah, most of the time he ends up just not really being that useful. Moving on, we have the ice shroom. Now, ice shroom costs only 75 sun but has an extremely slow recharge time. But it does make sense why ice shroom has a really slow recharge time, as well he's actually a pretty good plant, as well he freezes every single zombie on the lawn for 3.25 seconds. And while he also deals 20 damage to every zombie on the lawn, and for 16 seconds after the zombies are done being frozen, they're actually chilled, which just makes them really slow. So yeah, this plant is actually really useful, so it does make sense why the recharge time is just really slow. So yeah, he definitely is overall a really good plant, but it does hinder its ability with having a really slow recharge time. Next we have Doom Shroom. Now, just like Ice Shroom, Doom Shroom has a very slow recharge time, but it makes sense as well he literally insta-kills most of the map. As well, he literally blows up every zombie for around half the entire board, so it makes sense why he has a really slow recharge time, as well he's just a really good plant. He also leaves a crater for 3 minutes, which means nothing could be placed there. Which means you probably want to place Doom Shroom really far up on the lawn, so it makes it so you won't really have to ever place a plant there anyways. But yeah, Doom Shroom is obviously a really useful plant, so it makes sense why he has a really slow recharge time, and also it makes sense why he leaves a crater for 3 minutes. But yeah, Doom Shroom is definitely one of the best Shroom plants, as it literally insta-kills like half the board. Next we have Sea Shroom. Now, Sea Shroom is basically identical to Puff Shroom, as well he costs 0 stun and also deals around the exact same amount of damage. He also has the exact same shooting range, but unlike the Puff Shroom, he actually has a really slow recharge time. So yeah, honestly, he's really not that useful of a plant, as well just like Puff Shroom, he doesn't really deal that much damage and also has a pretty slow recharge time. Next we have the Magnet Shroom. Now, the Magnet Shroom costs 100 stun and has a very fast recharge time. And while Magnet Shroom is actually really useful, as though he takes objects like buckets and pickaxes from the zombies, which actually makes them a lot weaker. And well, another really good thing about the Magnet Shroom is that he actually has a really small recharge time, so you can actually place tons of them so they can steal basically everything from the zombies. So yeah, if you use him in the right way, Magnet Shroom could actually be a really good plant. Next we have the Gold Magnet. Now, the Gold Magnet is just an upgraded version of the normal Magnet Shroom, and honestly, he just really isn't that good. Now, the Gold Magnet costs 50 stun, but has a very slow recharge time. And well, instead of taking away things from the zombie, he actually just collects coins that spawn on the board after killing zombies. Which is probably one of the most useless things plants have ever done, as well, but literally downgrades the Magnet Shroom, as well. You can literally just collect the coins yourself, but you can't collect the zombies' armor, so Magnet Shroom is just much better. So yeah, honestly, Gold Magnet is probably one of the worst plants in the game, as well, but doesn't really have any use to it. So yeah, honestly, I have no idea in which situation you would ever need to use Gold Magnet Shroom at all. Next we have Gloom Shroom. Now, Gloom Shroom is the upgraded version of the Fume Shroom, and he's actually a really good upgrade. As well, he attacks zombies in a 3x3 radius and actually deals a lot of damage. And while Gloom Shroom is definitely one of the better upgraded plants, as well, he actually deals a lot of damage and actually a pretty useful plant. So yeah, overall, Gloom Shroom is just a pretty good plant that I would recommend using. Now, moving on to Plants vs. Zombies Social Edition, we have the Icy Fume Shroom. Now, this plant costs 200 stun and has a very fast recharge time. And while he does the exact same thing as the Fume Shroom and basically has the exact same stats as the Fume Shroom, but instead of just shooting zombies with Fume, he actually slows them down. And while he could also kill screen door zombies just like the normal Fume Shroom, but he ends up just chilling all the zombies in front of him, which is just a really useful feature. But he does end up having the same issues as the Fume Shroom, as well. He can only shoot 4 tiles in front of him, so it does end up making him a bit weaker than he could be. But yeah, this plant ends up just being really useful, as well. Not only could you chill the zombies in front of him, you could also deal a pretty good amount of damage. Next up we have the Fire Shroom. Now, this plant costs 75 stun, but has a really slow recharge time. And well, this plant basically acts like a walnut, but while the zombie's eating it, it actually burns to death. And well, this plant actually deals an insane amount of damage, as well when any zombie's eating it, it actually gets killed pretty quickly. So yeah, this plant is actually one of the more useful ones, as well, but just works really well, especially because you can place this plant in front of other plants, and it basically acts like a walnut that just deals damage. Now, we're going to be moving on to Plants vs. Zombies 2, starting off with the Spore Shroom. Now, this plant costs 150 stun and has a 5-second recharge time. Now, all this plant does is that it really just shoots projectiles into the air that hits the zombies in front of him. And while he's really not that powerful as a plant, as well, he only deals 50 damage and he shoots pretty slowly. So yeah, honestly, I wouldn't really recommend using Spore Shroom, as well, he shoots pretty slowly, and there's a ton of other better plants that could easily do the exact same thing as Spore Shroom, but just do it better. Next, we have the Perfume Shroom. Now, this plant costs 150 stun, but has a really slow recharge time of 30 seconds. Now, all this plant does is that it makes it so that those dinosaurs actually just fight with the plants instead of with the zombies. So yeah, it basically makes it so that the dinosaurs just go against the zombies instead of just being with them, which could be pretty useful. But one thing that holds this plant back from actually being a really good plant is that it takes a long time to recharge and you could only use it in one world. So yeah, since you can only use it in one world and only in a couple of levels, it doesn't end up being really that useful. Next we have the Shadow Shroom. Now this plant costs 50 sun, it has a 10-second recharge time. And well, when a zombie eats this plant, it actually deals an insane amount of damage, so it poisons the zombies and deals 900 damage. And well, the zombie that gets poisoned could also spread it to the other zombies nearby, which ends up just making it pretty useful. But yeah, you do actually have to be strategic with this plant though, as it'll only be really useful if you place it in front of a pretty strong zombie like a buckethead zombie, as if you just place it in front of a basic zombie, it won't really do that much, as it'll basically instantly kill it. So it'd be smarter to place on a much stronger zombie, as it would give it more time to also spread the poison to other zombies, which would kill them. So yeah, mattering on how you use this plant could actually be a pretty good one. Next we have Puffball. Now this plant costs 150 sun and has a 20-second recharge time. And well, when this plant is placed, it immediately explodes and poisons all the zombies that is next to it in a 3-column radius. And well, not only will it poison them, it'll also stun them temporarily, which is also just a really useful thing. As well, the poison also works when the zombies are stunned, which ends up just making the plant even more useful, and every few seconds it'll deal 50 damage from the poison. But unlike the Shadow Shroom, the zombies can't actually spread the poison to each other, so it really only poisons the zombies that immediately get poisoned, which does slightly lower its potential, but if you use it correctly, it could actually be a pretty good plant. Next we have Vamporcini. Now this plant costs 100 sun and has a 20-second recharge time. Now this plant acts as a wall plant, so you basically just place it in front of other plants so that it can get eaten. But one thing that makes it stand out from other wall plants like Infinite and Walnut is that it actually steals the zombie's HP and adds it to its own. Which means that it could get all the way up to 4,000 HP, which basically makes it just really strong. And well, it's the only wall plant that does it, so it actually makes it stand out a bit more, and it makes it so it's actually really difficult to get rid of this plant, as well, the only real way to get rid of it is if there's just tons of different zombies on top of this plant at once eating it, as well, it could just suck in the zombie's health and recharge itself. So it ends up just being a really good plant overall. Next we have the Guard Shroom. Now this plant costs 200 sun, but has a pretty slow recharge time of 30 seconds. Now this plant is able to be used as a wall plant, but it also spawns miniature versions of itself to also protect the other plants. It also gives other mushroom plants that is protecting a 1.5% damage boost, which does actually make it pretty useful, as it works really well with other shroom plants. So yeah, it could also deal a pretty good amount of damage on its own, so yeah, it ends up just being a pretty useful plant. Now moving on to the next game, we have Plants vs Zombies 2 China. Now starting off with the first plant, we have the Flat Shroom. Now this plant is only really usable in the Steam Age world, as he's only able to be planted on certain areas. So it ends up just really hindering its ability, as since he can only be placed on certain areas, he can't really be used as well as other plants. But one thing that is pretty good about this plant is that he costs 0 sun, but he does have a 20-second recharge time. And while this plant ends up just being really useless, as well, the only thing that it does is that it just protects certain areas like the sewers in the world so that zombies can't go through them. But besides that, this plant is just really useless, as well, other plants could do its exact same thing and also deal damage at the exact same time. So yeah, honestly, this plant just really doesn't do anything, and it doesn't really have any reason to exist. Next we have the Hat Mushroom. Now this plant costs 200 sun and has a very fast recharge time of only 5 seconds. Now this plant will throw its hat at zombies and it'll bounce off multiple zombies, very similar to Bowling Bulb. And well, for each zombie that it hits, it deals 60 damage to it, but it takes time to recharge the hat on it so it's able to throw it again. Overall, this plant is just sort of a copy of the Bowling Bulb, as well, but it just throws its hat and it bounces off other zombies, and it also takes a very similar amount of time to recharge it, so it's able to throw its hat again. So yeah, overall, mattering on the situation, it could be a pretty good plant, mattering on how you use it. Next we have the Cryo Shroom. Now this plant costs 175 sun and takes 5 seconds to recharge. Now this plant works very similar to the Snow Pea, as well, he deals around the exact same amount of damage once he's fully grown, and every time he hits a zombie, he chills them for around the exact same amount of time as a Snow Pea. And while very similar to the sun shroom, he grows over time, so after 60 seconds he'll be fully grown and will be able to deal a lot more damage. So yeah, if you want to use this plant really well, you have to place him right down at the beginning, as well by the time about in the middle of the level he'll be able to be fully grown. And well, next up we have the pyro shroom, which is basically the exact same thing. The only difference between this plant is that it costs 225 sun and takes 7.5 seconds to recharge. And instead of just chilling the zombies, he actually is very similar to the fire pea, as well, but literally just burns the zombies instead of chilling them. So yeah, they deal the exact same amount of damage, and well, they basically do the exact same thing. And well, another really small change about this one from the cryo shroom is that he only takes 40 seconds to grow into his final stage, while this cryo shroom takes 60 seconds to do that. But yeah, they're basically the exact same plant when it comes to the stats and damage and everything. Next we have the magic shroom. Now this plant costs 175 sun and takes 15 seconds to recharge. Now this plant shoots cards at the zombies and it goes through them and it goes back to the magic shroom. And well, it works very similarly to the bloomerang, as well he shoots cards and then it goes backwards back to him. And well, he does actually have a pretty fast attack rate as well, but it only takes 1.4 seconds for him to attack again. And well, he also deals 50 damage, so yeah, he's actually just a basically slightly more powerful version of the bloomerang. Now moving on to the next plant, we have the Earth Star Launch Silo. Now that honestly has to be one of the strangest names of a plant that I've ever seen, as well who came up with the name Earth Star Launch Silo? Like, that has to be one of the strangest names I've ever seen in all of the Plants vs. Zombies franchise. But yeah, besides the weird name, this plant could actually be pretty good. As well, this plant costs 450 sun and takes 10 seconds to recharge, but he deals an insane amount of damage. As well, he shoots rockets into the air, which ends up hitting the zombies and basically instantly kills them because it deals 700 damage. He also hits zombies at a 3x3 radius, which ends up just being really good. It will, even if it doesn't insta-kill the zombie, like it shoots a gargantua or something, it'll actually give the zombie radiation, so it ends up dying over time. But yeah, one huge downside to this plant though is that it takes 26 seconds to recharge his attack. So yeah, after you first place it down and it shoots a rocket, it'll take another 26 seconds to shoot it again. But yeah, it just deals an insane amount of damage to a 3x3 radius and it'll basically insta-kill most zombies. Next we have the Abyss Ammonon. Now this is just once again a really good plant, but it only costs 50 sun and only takes 10 seconds to recharge. And while this plant actually deals 400 damage, which is actually a lot of damage for a plant. But one big downside to it though is that it only kills zombies 3 tiles in front of it, which really lowers its ability to be a really good plant. As of what this plant does is that it pulls zombies towards it and then slowly eats them. And well, just like the last plant that we looked at, one big downside to it is that it takes 25 seconds to recharge, so it's not able to eat any other zombies for 25 seconds. Which is just another big downside to this plant, just like the last one, which really hinders its ability. Now, moving on to the next game, we have Plants vs. Zombies Online. And well, for the first mushroom, we have the Ganoderma. Now, this plant costs only 100 sun and has a really fast recharge time. Now, this plant just really isn't that good overall, so it only deals 10 damage to zombies that it hits. Which is actually just a really low amount of damage, as well most plants do that much damage easily. So 10 damage just really isn't that much, but one thing that sort of makes up for that is that it shoots spores really quickly. So even though that it only deals 10 damage, it could sort of make up to that by shooting tons of them. But yeah, honestly, in most situations, you won't really have to use this plant as well, but just doesn't really deal that much damage. Next up, we have the Nitro Shroom. Now, just like the last mushroom that we looked at, it costs 100 sun and has a really fast recharge time. Now, this plant actually has a pretty interesting ability as well, but it literally spawns smaller versions of itself to attack the zombies in front of it. But once again, just like the other plant that we looked at, it has a really low attack damage rate, so yeah, it honestly just really isn't worth it as well, but deals a really small amount of damage. So yeah, honestly, these last two plants that we looked at, they would just be a lot better if they deal just slightly more damage as well. They deal both a really low amount of damage, so they should have just made them a bit better. As well, both of these plants' abilities are just really hindered due to the damage that they do to the zombies just being really low. So yeah, once again, this plant just really isn't worth using, as well there's tons of other plants that could just deal a lot more damage than this plant. Now moving on to Plants vs. Zombies Garden Warfare 2, we have the Goop Shroom. Now this is a spawnable plant that you could place in Plants vs. Zombies Garden Warfare 2, and it basically does the exact same thing as a fume shroom, but it just fires goop instead of fumes. And well, instead of instantly doing damage like the fumes, it ends up just getting the goop on the other players and just deals damage over time. So yeah, it basically just deals damage really slowly, and it stays on them for a really long time, so it can actually deal a lot of damage over time. It could also slow down the zombies, which is just another really useful thing that it could do. Next we have the toxic gloom shroom. Now once again, just like the goop shroom, this is a spawnable plant. It's actually pretty hard to get. And well, this plant once again just is a very similar thing to the last one, but it just shoots toxic gas. And well, once again, it just slowly damages the zombies with poison nearby. So yeah, after a zombie is hit by it, it deals 20 damage over time, just dealing damage slowly to the zombies. So yeah, just like the goop shroom, he just deals poison damage and slowly kills zombies over time. Moving on to the next game, we have Plants vs. Zombies All-Stars, and starting off, we have the Moody Shroom. Now, this is the first evolution of the Doom Shroom line, and well, it deals the least amount of damage. As well, if you don't know how Plants vs. Zombies All-Stars works, it basically makes it so that the plants can slowly get stronger and stronger going through the tiers. And well, this is the first tier of the Doom Shroom line, and it's just really bad. As well, it deals a really low amount of damage, and honestly, it just really isn't that good. As well, it can only deal damage to one enemy at once, which is just a really low amount compared to the other two tiers of it. So yeah, it's really just not that good. But moving on to the third tier of the Doom Shroom line, we have the Bomb Doom Shroom. Now this plant deals an insane amount of damage to a large group of enemies. And another insane thing that I could do is that I could actually shoot lasers from its eyes. So yeah, this ends up just being a really powerful plant, as well, not only could it shoot lasers from its eyes, it could also deal an insane amount of damage when exploding. So yeah, compared to the tier 1, this one's just a lot more powerful and could do a lot more. Moving on to the next line, we have the Charm line, and the first plant in the Charm line is the Beauty Shroom. Now this plant deals a really low amount of damage, and it deals damage by sending hearts to the enemies, and they don't really deal that much damage. And well, that's all this plant really does, is it only throws hearts, and that's all it really does, and it deals a really low amount of damage, so it ends up just not being that good. But moving on to the third tier of this line, we have the Talisman Shroom. And while this plant deals an insane amount of damage and attacks by throwing tassels. Another thing that this plant could do is that it could actually confuse the enemies, making them not being able to attack. Which is just another really useful feature as well, but it's just really good compared to the Beauty Shroom as well. That could only really do one thing, while this one could not only confuse the enemies, it could also attack them. So yeah, this one's just overall really powerful and it's just really useful most of the time. Now moving on to the Poison Shadow line, with the first plant being the Toxic Shroom. Now all the plants in this line do the exact same thing, being shooting poison. And well, since the Toxic Shroom is the first tier to this line, it basically does no damage. And the poison barely lasts, but only really lasts for one turn, so yeah, it's just really not that useful. But moving on to the second tier, we have the Septus Shroom, and this does the exact same thing, but it just deals slightly more damage, and the poison lasts for a longer time. So yeah, for that one reason, it's just a bit more useful than the Toxic Shroom as well, but just deals slightly more damage, and the poison lasts for a little while longer. And while moving on, we have the Magnet line. Starting off with the second tier, we have the Electromagnet Shroom. Now what this plant does is that it lowers the defense of the enemies, meaning that they take more damage, and it also throws magnets at them. Which is actually really useful as well, but it just makes the other enemies' plants weaker and then just throws magnets at them, dealing a lot more damage. So yeah, it's just a really useful plant as well, especially when you're playing with other really powerful plants from other lines, you could just deal an insane amount of damage. And while moving on to the third tier of this line, we have the Magneto Shroom. And well, this plant does the exact same thing, but it makes the enemy's defense even lower and also deals a lot more damage. So yeah, it does the exact same thing as the second tier of the Magnet line, but it just deals more damage and also lowers the defense even more. And moving on to the next game, we have Plants vs. Zombies Heroes. And starting off with the first plant, we have the Button Mushroom. Now this plant is just really weak as well, but it only costs 1 sun, but it only has 1 strength point, it only has 1 health point. Making it one of the most useless mushrooms in the entire game as well, but barely deals any damage and barely has any health. So yeah, honestly, it's really just not that useful overall. It also has no special traits or no special abilities, so that makes it even more useless. But it does make sense why this plant is just really weak, as it was one of the most common plants in the entire game, so it would make sense why this plant is just really weak. Moving on, we have the poison mushroom. Now this plant once again costs 1 sun, has 1 health point and 1 strength point, but it does actually have a trait. This trait being the anti-hero 2 trait. So yeah, it is slightly more useful than the last plant, as though the last plant didn't have the trait, but this one actually does. And well, as you can expect from the name being poison mushroom, it does poison damage to the zombies, which just makes it a bit more useful. For the next shroom plant, we have the shroom for 2. Now this plant costs 1 sun, and it has 1 health and 1 strength point. Now this plant doesn't have any special traits or any special abilities, but it does spawn a pushroom in front of it when it's planted down, which does actually make it slightly more useful than others, as it literally spawns a whole nother plant, but not really a powerful one. So yeah, the fact that it does place a pushroom down just makes it slightly more useful, but for the plant itself, it just doesn't really deal that much damage. For the next plant, we have the Astro Shroom. Now this plant costs 1 sun, and it has 1 health point and 1 strength point. And well, it does actually have a trait being the bullseye trait, and it also has a special ability. This ability being it deals 1 damage to the zombie hero every time it's played. And well, this ability actually stacks with each Astro Shroom on the field, meaning that the more you place, the more damage that it deals to the zombie hero. So yeah, if you place down tons of these plants, it will actually be pretty good. But yeah, besides this actual trait and special ability, it doesn't really do that much. Next we have the Buff Shroom. Now this plant costs 2 sun, and it has 1 health and strength point. Now this plant doesn't have any traits, but it actually does have an ability, giving itself an extra strength and health point, which actually does make it a bit more useful than the other plants that we've looked at as well. Since it gives itself 1 more health point and 1 more strength point, it actually makes it a bit more useful. Next we have the Shelf Mushroom. Now this plant costs 2 sun, and has 2 strength points and 2 health points. Now this plant doesn't have any traits, but it does have a special ability, being able to do 2 damage to whatever zombie you want or the zombie hero. So yeah, when you place this plant down, you are able to choose either a zombie that you want it to attack, or just attacking the zombie hero. So yeah, that is one thing that makes it a lot more useful than the other mushrooms that we've looked at already, and it also does have 2 health points and 2 strength points. So yeah, overall, it's really not that bad of a mushroom plant. Next up, we have the Mushroom Ringleader. Now once again, this is just a pretty strange name for a plant, but it costs 3 sun, and has 1 health and has 0 strength. Now this plant doesn't have any trait, but it actually does have ability, being able to give him 2 strength for every plant on the field, which is the reason that he actually spawns with 0 strength, as well if he already had strength on top of that, it would make him extremely powerful. So yeah, however strong this plant is actually matters on the player instead of the plant itself, as well. If you place down tons of plants on the field and place this one down, it will actually give it a ton of strength, making it one of the most powerful plants. So yeah, mattering on how you use this plant could be actually extremely useful or just really not that useful. Next we have the Punish Shroom. Now this plant costs 3 sun, it has 2 health and has 2 strength points. Now this plant doesn't have any trait, but it does have ability, being able to deal 2 damage to any zombie that you want or the zombie hero if a mushroom plant gets destroyed. Meaning that if you place another mushroom plant down and it gets destroyed by a zombie or whatever, this plant will be able to deal 2 damage to whatever zombie you want or the zombie hero. And well, that also includes itself, meaning that if this plant gets destroyed, right before that, you'll be able to deal 2 damage to whatever zombie you want or the zombie hero, which actually makes it pretty useful. As of unlike basically every single other plant in the game that gets destroyed and does nothing, this one actually does something, so yeah, that does actually make it a bit more useful. Meaning that if you actually do lose this plant, it's not actually a full loss, as well, you're still dealing damage to another zombie. Next we have the Mushroom Grota. Now this plant costs 3 sun, and has 0 health and 0 strength points. Now this plant actually has a pretty strange ability, as all it does is that it just spawns a pushroom in a random lane, which really isn't that useful, as this plant literally has 0 health and 0 strength, so why would you even use it? As it can literally get insta-killed, and all it does is really spawn a pushroom a few times, so yeah, it's just really not that useful. And there's really not that much of a reason to use this plant, as well. You can literally just place down pushrooms and it'll just be better. So yeah, honestly, this is one of the more useless mushroom plants. Next we have the Cosmic Mushroom. Now this plant costs 3 sun and has 2 health and 2 strength points. Now this plant doesn't have any traits, but its ability is actually pretty useful as it gives another mushroom plant 2 extra strength points, which is actually really useful as this plant itself already deals a good amount of damage, and it also gives another plant just a really good boost of damage. And well, this is even more useful if you place down a really good plant that already has lots of strength points and gives it even more. So yeah, it just ends up being really good if you use it correctly. And well, even without its ability, it's still a pretty good plant overall, as it has some pretty good stats. Next we have the grow shroom. Now this plant costs 3 sun and has 1 health point and 2 strength points. Now this plant doesn't have any traits, but it actually has a really useful ability as you could select one plant to give 2 strength points or 2 health points to. Meaning that once you place this plant down, you could choose whatever plant you want, and you have the choice to either give it 2 strength points or 2 health points. Which is really useful, especially if a plant is already damaged and is about to die. You could either give it 2 strength points or 2 health points. So yeah, overall with that ability, it just makes this plant really good. Next up we have the smush shroom. Now this plant costs 5 stun and has 4 health points and 5 strength points. Now this mushroom doesn't have any traits or any abilities, but that makes sense as it literally has 5 strength points and 4 health points, which already just makes this plant really good by itself. So yeah, it makes sense why it doesn't have any abilities as it's already just a really strong plant. So yeah, even without the ability, is overall just one of the better mushroom plants in this game. Now moving on to the next game, we have Plants vs. Zombies 3. Now the first mushroom is Shuffle Truffle. Now this plant only costs 1 sun and it has a 10-second recharge time and a 12-second cooldown. And well, this plant works sorta similar to plants like Charred Guard, as it shoots zombies back 1 tile. But honestly, this plant is just really useless if you think about it, as since it only shoots a zombie back 1 tile and has a 12-second cooldown, it doesn't really have much of a use. So yeah, honestly, this plant just really isn't that useful, as it has a really long cooldown, especially for only shooting a zombie back 1 tile. So yeah, it ends up just making this plant not as useful as it could have been if it just had a slower cooldown. And the next plant is the Fairy Ring Mushroom. Now this plant costs 9 sun and it has 650 health, which is actually a lot. And well, it also deals 90 damage, and it also has a 25-second cooldown, which does actually make it really hard to use though. And well, it deals 90 damage, which is also a pretty good amount of damage, but it does have a 25-second cooldown. And well, this plant attacks at a 3x3 radius, and when it kills zombies, it spawns puff shrooms. So yeah, basically for every zombie that this plant kills, it spawns a puff shroom for it. But by itself, it actually is a pretty good plant as well, but deals a pretty good amount of damage. So yeah, that was every single mushroom in the entire Plants vs. Zombies franchise. But yeah, honestly, before making this video, I had no idea that there was this many mushrooms as well. I just assumed there was a lot less, but it turns out there was just a lot more than I originally thought. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, then please like and subscribe, and comment down below out of all of these mushrooms, which one is your favorite. And yeah, have a great day.